So now we're going to talk about my philosophy of musical instruments. And we're going to look at a few different examples that illustrate what the interaction, the combination of materials, semiotics, and practices are in determining what a musical instrument is. We'll also look at a couple of key words, one being organology, the study of musical instruments, and the other one, instrumentality, which is basically the identity or the instrumental identity of an instrument. I've chosen these four objects to start with because they are pretty similar in form and shape, but distinctly different materials. So this is a great example of how materials can vary between musical instruments. We have ceramic, glass, some kind of metal alloy, and a kind of pitch material, which is a kind of composite style ceramic. Each of these objects, though, has a very different story about them as well. So, for example, even though the form is similar, this one belongs to an espresso cup. This is a found object. It belonged to a chandelier that I found in the backyard. My son was playing with it yesterday. This is a cymbal made by the PICA company, a kind of cymbal bell. And this is a clay target, also known as a clay pigeon, which is used for trap shooting. So four very different objects associated with very different things. This is a kind of kitchen or domestic object. This is part of an ornament, something that might live inside a house. This is a percussion instrument in the traditional sense. And this is associated with the sport, the Olympic sport of trap shooting. We can engage with these objects through various practices. They make us want to make different sounds. For example, struck with mallets, we can hear them in a sort of bell-like fashion. They can be dragged. They can be rocked. And all sorts of other techniques can flow from this. The fact that this has a sharp metallic edge means that I could probably get this to sing across another surface through friction. This object isn't resonant enough to do that. This, because of its ribbed and flowing outside, I could create other kinds of techniques. And this ceramic object has its own characteristics as well. So you can see how a practice, the way I play the object, the way I play the instrument, is very much informed by its form and how it wants to sound. So here we have four other similar kinds of objects, each of them made from a different material: ceramic, brass, glass, and another type of porcelain or ceramic. What's interesting about these objects is that their form varies slightly, so they'll therefore sound different. Their materials, of course, are different, but they're all connected semiotically. Each of these objects would be recognizable to most people as a cup, glass, or mug, all associated with drinking or holding some kind of liquid. What's interesting about that is that they can just be, we could forget about the semiotics and play them like bells or sounding resonant objects. We could theatrically lean in to the fact that they are glasses and actually perform drinking activities involving liquids pouring into and out of the objects, or we can kind of play with that space in between. So the idea of the liquid also having some kind of impact on the performance practices. Even this technique is another technique that probably wouldn't work on the ceramic, but because of the water and the nature of this material, we can get another particular performance practice that's specific to glasses. This next set of objects are much more uniform. We have 4 clay targets and 1 circuit board used to sonify a clay target. These first 3 only really vary in colour. They're Olympic clay targets. This next one is a MIDI, which is smaller and therefore harder to spot in the sky. And what we notice really is that they're essentially the same object, just varied in colour and slightly in size. This is a modification to that material, a completely different material, a circuit board that's used to sonify the flight of these clay targets. As they fly through the air and spin at 100 kilometres an hour, this circuit board completes a circuit and makes a kind of chirping sound that allows us to sonify their flight. Now, the practices associated with this really relate back to trap shooting, the idea of shooting a flying clay target out of the sky. Many years ago, they used live pigeons. So these objects can be semiotically connected to birds or pigeons. We have the materials that are relatively consistent, these very specific semiotics, and the practices associated with trap shooting and flying clay targets. Here are two objects that have lots of semiotic connections. But firstly, on a material level, here's a clay target made of pitch, and this is mostly made of wood and some metal on the back. The reason they belong together is that the form is similar, obviously the size is different, but they're connected because this is a clay target, also known as a clay pigeon, and this is supposed to be a kind of bird mirror toy. So what it does is it spins, and as it spins in the air, we get this kind of mirror-like object that you might see in a bird cage. On the one side, we see that it looks like a clay target, and on the other, it's a mirror, like the mirror we would see in a bird cage. It's connecting the world of the pigeon and the world of a caged bird back to the clay target or the clay pigeon. So here are 6 other instruments in my personal collection. They're unified by the fact that they're all made of some kind of metal, but they're totally different in terms of their form, and they have a very different personal history to me. This here is a Melbourne Board of Works cover for a water meter that I bought in an op shop in my 20s. This is an armglocken or a cowbell that's pitched to a G sharp that I bought in Copenhagen. This is a Chinese gong that I bought in Beijing many years ago, about approximately an F sharp in pitch. This is a spring coil that I bought in a metal yard. This is a Japanese rin that I bought in Tokyo, often associated with Buddhist ritual practices. And this is a piece of tubing that I also bought at a metal wrecking yard. So there's a history, a personal history that I hold to each of these objects. Some of them have very particular functions, whether in ritual practice, whether to perform a protective duty, or function in a car or a truck. Nevertheless, each of these objects produces a unique sound using a similar material, but can tell a story or help deepen our understanding of music. There are so many different ways in which we can understand or think about instruments. We can think about their classifications, for example, whether it's their idiophones, membranophones, aerophones, these kinds of categories. We can think about their pitch class. These, for example, have been tuned or selected for their pitch. We can think about their function or their performative practices. Like here we can see a couple of these objects have handles made for human interaction. Similarly, we can associate them with other sounds and think about them from an orchestrational perspective. This spring coil is often used as a kind of surrogate triangle, for example. And all of these other semiotic, cultural, historical relationships, as I described earlier, are very much part of what these objects are. Their identity as well is very specific to those objects, specific to the performer and the context in which they're being used as well. And we can really use those things to help drive a composition. So an object like this, could look like an anvil, it could look like a weapon, it could hold liquid as well. It could cover something else. We could hide things with it. Again, all of these ideas, whilst they're not musical, they might be performative, and they could help to derive meaning from the performative and musical actions that happen. Similarly, an object like this might open a whole world into a style of music associated with Chinese opera, for example, which might be a total contrast to a Japanese Buddhist instrument, for example. So many of the semiotic, performative roles can help inform how we think about music. And it doesn't just have to be unusual objects like this. It could be any standard conventional musical instrument as well. Organology is the study of musical instruments. And importantly, aside from its form and structure and sound, it does take into account all of these cultural, historical, and technical things that help make the instrument what it is. But we can never remove the practices, the doing. Imagine if the spring coil sat there, you mightn't know how it sounded. If I never picked the spring coil up, it wouldn't sound as resonant. So there are various practice, material, and semiotic things that must interact in order for the instrument to really be an instrument.